June 27, 1976. Air France Flight 139 is cruising peacefully from Tel Aviv to Paris. 248 passengers, 12 crew members. In just minutes, their routine flight would become an international crisis that would end with one of the most daring military operations in history. This is the story of Operation Entebbe, also known as Operation Thunderbolt, a rescue mission so audacious, so impossibly risky, that even today, military strategists study it as a masterclass in tactical precision. But it's also a story about courage, sacrifice, and a race against time 2,500 miles from home. Let me set the scene. It's 1976, and airplane hijackings are disturbingly common. But this one would be different. Shortly after a scheduled stopover in Athens, 4 hijackers, 2 Palestinians from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and 2 Germans from the Revolutionary Cells movement, rose from their seats. They were armed with grenades and pistols that had been smuggled through Athens's notoriously lax security. The leader was a German woman named Wilfried Bose, his partner Brigitte Kuhlmann, and commanding them were 2 PFLP operatives. They stormed the cockpit and took control of the aircraft. The passengers were terrified, screaming, crying. One moment they're reading magazines and drinking coffee, the next they're hostages in a terrorist operation. The hijackers didn't demand the plane return to the Middle East. Instead, they diverted to Benghazi, Libya, a fuel stop. Already this told intelligence agencies something important. This was a well-planned operation. They had a destination in mind that required extended range. After refueling in Libya, where one hostage, a pregnant woman, was released, the plane took off again. Hours later, it touched down at Entebbe Airport in Uganda, East Africa, over 2,500 miles from Israel. And here's where things get politically explosive. Uganda was ruled by one of history's most brutal dictators, Idi Amin, a man who called himself His Excellency, President for Life, Field Marshal Al-Haji Dr. Idi Amin Dada, a man responsible for the deaths of up to 500,000 Ugandans. And Idi Amin wasn't just permitting this hijacking, he was actively supporting it. The hijackers moved all the hostages into the old terminal building at Entebbe Airport. This wasn't random. The building had been built by an Israeli construction firm years earlier. The hijackers likely had blueprints. They knew the layout. Soon, reinforcements arrived. 3 more terrorists joined the original 4, and Ugandan soldiers surrounded the terminal, not as rescuers, but as additional captors. The hijackers issued their ultimatum to the world: release 53 militants imprisoned in Israel, France, Germany, Kenya, and Switzerland. Deadline, July 1, 1976, or they would start executing hostages. Then came one of the most chilling moments of the crisis. The hijackers began separating the hostages. Israeli citizens on one side, Jews on another. Non-Jews released. For many of the Jewish hostages, some were Holocaust survivors. This selection process was a nightmare made horrifyingly real again. Decades after World War II, they were being separated based on their religion, wondering if they would live or die. Over the next few days, the hijackers released 148 non-Jewish hostages, but 94 remained, mostly Israelis, plus the Air France crew who refused to abandon their passengers. Captain Michel Bacos, the Air France pilot, was given the option to leave. His response? "I will stay with my passengers until the end." Absolute legend. Back in Israel, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin faced an impossible choice. Option 1. Negotiate. Give the terrorists what they want. But this would encourage future hijackings. It would put a target on every Israeli citizen abroad. Option 2. Refuse to negotiate. But 94 innocent people would likely die, executed on live television for the world to see. Option 3, the impossible option, a military rescue. 2,500 miles away, in a hostile nation, against unknown odds. Defense Minister Shimon Peres ordered the IDF to begin planning. The head of the operation? Brigadier General Dan Shamron. The ground commander? Lieutenant Colonel Yonatan Netanyahu. Yes, the older brother of future Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They faced enormous challenges. First, intelligence. What was the exact layout of the terminal? How many terrorists? How many Ugandan soldiers? Where exactly were the hostages being held? This is where things get incredible. Israel had built that terminal. They pulled the original construction blueprints. They interviewed the Israeli engineers who built it. They debriefed the released hostages who provided crucial details about guard rotations, terrorist locations, and the terminal layout. Second, logistics. Entebbe was 2,500 miles away. The C-130 Hercules transport planes could make the journey, but it would require perfect coordination, mid-air refueling considerations, and flying through potentially hostile airspace. Third, the element of surprise. If Idi Amin or the terrorists got even a hint of the operation, the hostages would be executed immediately. The Israelis built a full-scale replica of the terminal at a military base. For days, commandos rehearsed the assault, timing every movement down to the second. They studied the blueprints. They memorized every room, every corridor, every window. They had one advantage. Idi Amin loved Mercedes-Benz limousines, and a black Mercedes in Uganda meant someone important, someone you didn't question. July 3, 1976, 11 p.m. local time. 4 Israeli C-130 Hercules transport planes descended through the darkness toward Entebbe Airport. They flew at extremely low altitude to avoid radar detection. Inside were approximately 100 IDF commandos from the elite Sayeret Matkal unit, paratroopers, and Golani Brigade soldiers. The first plane touched down in complete darkness. The Israelis had radioed ahead with false credentials, pretending to be a routine cargo flight. The rear ramp dropped. Out rolled a black Mercedes, followed by Land Rovers, just like Idi Amin's motorcade. The vehicles drove straight toward the old terminal. Ugandan sentries, seeing the black Mercedes, assumed it was Idi Amin and initially didn't react. But then, confusion. One guard decided to check. The moment he approached, the commandos opened fire. The element of surprise was compromised, but they were already at the terminal doors. What happened next unfolded in just 53 minutes. Commandos burst through the terminal doors, shouting in Hebrew and English, "Stay down, stay down! We're Israeli soldiers! We're here to save you!" The terrorists, completely shocked, opened fire. The commandos returned fire with devastating accuracy. Within seconds, all 7 hijackers were neutralized. But it wasn't clean. In the chaos, one commando's weapon jammed, another was injured, and tragically, 3 hostages were caught in the crossfire. While the terminal team secured the hostages, other units fanned out. One team destroyed Ugandan MiG fighter jets on the tarmac to prevent aerial pursuit. Another team secured the runway perimeter. A third engaged Ugandan soldiers who began responding to the gunfire. The hostages, still in shock, were rushed onto the waiting C-130s. Many couldn't believe what was happening. They thought they were going to die, and now Israeli soldiers were lifting them onto transport planes. But then, the unthinkable. Commander Yonatan Netanyahu, The ground force commander was shot by a Ugandan sniper from the airport control tower. He was the only IDF soldier killed in the operation. Netanyahu had led from the front, as he always did. His death was a devastating blow, but the mission continued. There was no time to grieve. They had to get everyone out. The C-130s taxied for takeoff while Ugandan forces scrambled to respond. Bullets pinged off the aircraft fuselages. One plane's tires were shot out but kept rolling. One by one, the massive transport planes roared down the runway and lifted into the African night. They flew to Nairobi, Kenya for refueling. The Kenyan government had secretly agreed to help. July 4, 1976. The planes landed at Ben Gurion Airport. Crowds had gathered, waving flags, weeping with joy. 102 hostages rescued, 3 hostages killed during the assault. One hostage, 75-year-old Dora Bloch, was murdered in a Ugandan hospital in retaliation after the raid. All 7 hijackers eliminated. 1 IDF soldier killed, Lieutenant Colonel Yonatan Netanyahu. The operation, which Israel officially named Operation Yonatan in honor of their fallen commander, became a symbol of Israel's long-arm doctrine, the principle that Israel would protect its citizens anywhere in the world, no matter the distance or difficulty. The world's response was complicated. Most Western nations praised the operation as a triumph against terrorism. The United Nations Security Council convened, and while some nations condemned Israel for violating Ugandan sovereignty, others recognized it as legitimate self-defense and hostage rescue. Idi Amin, humiliated, retaliated against Kenyan citizens in Uganda and broke diplomatic relations with Kenya for allowing the Israeli planes to refuel. Operation Entebbe changed military doctrine forever. It proved that hostage rescue operations could succeed at extreme distances. Speed, surprise, and intelligence were paramount. No terrorist could assume safety no matter where they operated. Today, counter-terrorism units worldwide study Entebbe. The British SAS, US Delta Force, German GSG-9, they all learned from what happened that night in Uganda. Yonatan Netanyahu's death wasn't in vain. He led one of the most successful hostage rescues in history. His brother Benjamin Netanyahu would later say that Yoni's leadership in combat and his sacrifice profoundly shaped his own worldview. Captain Michel Bacos, the Air France pilot who refused to abandon his passengers, was later honored by Israel. He remained a hero until his death in 2019. And for the hostages who survived, July 3, 1976 became a second birthday, the day they were given their lives back. Operation Entebbe reminds us that when facing impossible odds, courage and meticulous planning can achieve the unthinkable. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories from history.